All right, everybody. So this is our third installment of the Move to Global War Germany slideshows that we're going to cover, and this is going to be the international response to German aggression from 1935 to 1940. So a little bit more detail on things that were covered in the last two slideshows. Certain things, right? We're not going to cover every single thing in even more detail, but certain things looking at the perspective from Britain and France and seeing why appeasement plays a role in how we get to Hitler eventually invading Poland on September 1st, 1939. Okay, so what are the themes here? What are the components of the international response to German aggression? Rearmament and the attempted Anschluss, remilitarization of the Rhineland, Spanish Civil War, and the Anschluss, and then the Sudetenland forward. Talking about all those things. All right, so big thing is this. We know about the disarmament conference. We know that Hitler's going to pull out of that disarmament conference because he's going to be like, France is unwilling to disarm, so is Britain. And you know what? If that's going to be the case, we have the right to rearm because we have to protect ourselves. France is like, okay, fine, go have at it. But Britain's going to try their best to get, and I should say that they also leave the League of Nations at this time. Britain's going to try their best to get Germany back into the disarmament conference and back into the League of Nations. So they go to Germany and pretty much say, hey, what if we allow you to have an army at 200,000 and say, France, you can only have an army at 2,000, that France should reduce its army to 200,000? What if we said that you are allowed to have half the size of an air force as the French Air Force? France obviously was never going to agree to this position. And may I remind you, when Britain is going and proposing these things to Germany, they're desperate to get Germany back in because they don't want to see Germany rearmed to a certain extent, but they also want to appease them and not make them a complete aggressor, right? That's the whole point, is to stop them from being an aggressor by giving an inch. And again, they felt bad about the results from the Treaty of Versailles and how they were treated as a result of the Treaty of Versailles. France could care less. But anyway, as of 1935, it comes out that Germany's been doing some very questionable things in the background, right? So they introduce conscription, so the draft, and it comes out that's when Hermann Goering announces that they have an air force and that they've been secretly rearming this entire time. So this leads the British and the French, but mainly the British, to finally just give up on that whole entire effort of getting Germany back into the League of Nations and trying to get them back into a disarmament conference, as they knew that we've reached the point now of no return. Germany has started to rearm. Now it is a sense of us trying to appease them and stop aggressive actions in regards to various territories. They are going to start to go after them, but that's going to be our objective at this point. We can't stop them from rearming. They've already done it. And we have to get ourselves prepared as well. But the main thing is they're going to use appeasement. Really, Britain's going to use appeasement to try to calm down Hitler and his demands that exist at this point. And you can look at the numbers over here, right? Germany's military expenditure went from 2.7 billion marks in 1933 to 8 billion in 1935. So it was a dramatic leap. But anyway, besides the point, Britain is not successful in getting Germany to disarm. In fact, Germany's been rearming behind the scenes. And we know this from when we talked about Italy, right? The failed attempt at that Anschluss back in 1934, where, and I know I said it in the last slideshow and we'll keep emphasizing it, it's super important, where Engelbert Dollfuss is assassinated by Austrian Nazis, and Mussolini takes this as a direct threat that basically the Anschluss is going to happen. So he sends troops through the Brenner Pass, going from Italy into Austria, and then puts them at the border of Germany, his 100,000 troops, and said, give it your best shot, Hitler. And Hitler's not ready at this point in 1934 to do anything. But we know Britain, France, and Italy are going to come together and say, hey, we have to do something about Germany. We have to try to create an alliance with each other to ensure that we will uphold the borders that were agreed upon in the Locarno treaties. We will uphold some of the remaining elements of the Treaty of Versailles in terms of not necessarily, to a certain extent, rearmament. That's going to play a role in it, but really more so focused on borders. But yes, rearmament to a certain extent. And again, just making sure that the three of us, Italy, Britain, and France, we agree that we're going to uphold the agreements that have been made and try to keep Germany from rehashing some of the issues it has with the Treaty of Versailles and trying to get rid of it. but not get rid of it, but reform what was done and make Germany great again through those reforms. Obviously, we know, though, that this that this Stresa front does not last. And I mean, it does exist on paper, but there are things behind the scenes that are going to make this agreement inevitably extremely weak. The big thing that's mentioned on this slide right here is going to be this Britain's Anglo-German naval agreement. But one of the first things is the Franco-Soviet Mutual Assistance Treaty that's signed with Russia in 1935. Pretty much what France's objective is, and you saw this through the other slides I've talked about, right, is even when we were going over the Italy stuff, you see as France is more concerned with German aggression and they don't think that they have Britain to support them, and the United States never ratifies that Treaty of Versailles, that they need to take matters into their own hands, right? So they want to surround Germany with alliances, and that feels very much like a repeat of World War I. And that's one of the reasons why Britain's like, hey, we don't want to agitate Germany by surrounding it with different alliances. So Britain has no interest in getting involved, is a little bit suspect about what France is doing in terms of getting in a treaty with the Soviet Union. I should also say this. France has much more liberal governments from time to time. Again, you do see conservatives come to power, but mainly popular front governments with coalitions of like liberals, socialist, and communist politicians. Britain is basically ruled by conservatives throughout the 1930s. So they're also suspect in terms of France making an agreement with the Soviet Union. They don't trust the Soviet Union. And they were worried about an agreement between France and the Soviet Union is going to make Germany feel encircled. And Italy itself is also unwilling to get involved in an agreement with the Soviet Union because it doesn't want to align itself with communists. So that's one area in which the three of them couldn't come to an agreement in terms of France makes this agreement with the Soviet Union, but the other two, Britain and France, are like, hey, what are you doing there, France? Like, it's a little bit silly what you're doing. The big thing that really harms outside of Abyssinia, so we'll say that the Franco-Soviet Mutual Assistance Treaty is number 3 on our list in terms of the big things that harm the Stresa front. Number 1, we'll say, is Abyssinia, even though I think you could actually put the Britain Anglo-German naval agreement on top. It's a tie for first, in my opinion. So June 1935, this is really right briefly after the Stresa front is formed. We're going to protect the Locarno agreements. We're going to protect the agreements in the Treaty of Versailles. We will protect some of the elements of rearmament as well. And then Britain turns right around and makes an agreement with Germany because they know Germany's getting aggressive. They don't want to, they have their navy expanded all over the world, extended to various areas of the world. They need to protect their empire. They don't want to see Germany become this ultra super strong naval force that can overtake theirs. So they turn right around after having this Stresa conference and this meeting with Italy and France saying, we're going to protect everything that we promised we would protect. They turn right around, they go to the Nazis and they say, let's come up with the naval agreement. And this is what it says. Hitler is going to offer to limit the German fleet to 35% of the British fleet. I think I said that wrong on the last slideshow and I deeply apologize in terms of the video lecture. You need to know the Anglo-German naval agreement. It's important, right? So limit the German fleet to 35% of the British fleet. So this is destroyers, cruise ships, battleships, and basically in terms of tonnage, you're going to have Germany's going to have 35% of the tonnage of Britain's naval fleet, but can have the same amount in terms of U-boats. So this agreement is a complete slap in the face to what the whole Stresa front was about. You sign this agreement with the Nazis after we just had an agreement with each other. We would uphold the Treaty of Versailles and the Locarno treaties. Why the hell are you doing this? This is silly. So Britain agrees to this on June 18th, allowed German submarines, I told you this, fleet equal to Britain's. This completely condones Germany's violations of the Treaty of Versailles. It gives them an open door. It says, hey, one of the major Western powers is so concerned about you rearming, they're not even going to put anything in to really stop you. They're going to appease you by letting you do it to a certain extent rather than saying, halt, stop, you're not even supposed to be rearming to this extent. You're not allowed to, and we're going to do something about it. Remember, there is strategy behind this. Okay, the strategy is, the big thing is we're dealing with the Great Depression. People are still affected by the results of World War I. You do have war-weary publics. So this is Britain trying to appease and use that policy in regard to Germany. But the Anglo-German naval agreement, I would arguably put at number 1 compared to Abyssinia, but I'm sure that's up for historical debate. It's up for your conclusions, right? And we know the whole crisis in Abyssinia where Britain and France are walking that tightrope where they have to show that the League of Nations has teeth. And then remember that at the Stresa Conference as well, Mussolini gets the wink and the nudge pretty much from Britain and France that, hey, if you do this, if you go into Abyssinia later on, we're not really going to do anything to stop you. But the issue is Britain and France have to make the League of Nations seem like it's legitimate because they're the two leading Western powers that are a part of it. So the League has to do something. But while they're leading the League and trying to get the League to do something in their very limited sanctions, they're behind the scenes trying to basically negotiate away the sovereignty to a certain extent of Ethiopia. And then the Horleval Pact leaks to the press. Mussolini gets ticked off about this. He basically views the British and French as distrustful partners and realizes that he may be able to get a closer relationship with Hitler, and that relationship won't put the constraints on him that relationships with liberal governments would. So that plays a role. But personally, again, my opinion, British Anglo-German naval agreement is a little bit more important. Both are equally important. Obviously, the whole event in Ethiopia is important, but the other one I would consider is the real heartbreak for the Stresa Front. This is a political cartoon that I believe 4A had on their paper one exam, which has Mussolini and then the British and French prime ministers at the time, foreign ministers at the time, sitting in a raft, basically a wooden barrel that says collective isolationism. So basically implying that we're all agreeing with each other, but we're not going to hold the agreements of what's going on. And then you see all these submarine scopes that are over here have have the swastika on them, and it says the three wise men of Stresa went to sea in a barrel. If the barrel had been stronger, my story would have been longer. Basically, and this says, it's hard to read it here, but the Anglo-German naval deal, basically signifying that deal really hurt the agreements between the three of them in the Stresa Front. Okay, remilitarization in the Rhineland. France and Britain, we know, don't really do anything about this. Germany just walks in. And for Hitler, this is a huge gamble because he tells his men pretty much, if we go in there and we meet resistance from the French or the British, we have to turn around. And he gets none of that resistance. Reasons why. France is currently under the control of a caretaker government. What does this mean? The members of parliament are waiting for another election to unfold. So the British and the French, not the British and the French, the liberals and the conservatives, whether they're far left, far right, center left, center right, within the French government, don't want to run the risk of getting France involved into a war. That's what they don't want to run the risk of. So they're going to pretty much allow Germany to walk into the demilitarized Rhineland and remilitarize it. France also gets bad military advice. They hear from their chief of staff pretty much that Germany was going to march in with a force of 265,000 men. Reality, it was 30,000. So France was not ready to deal with the military of this size. They do have the Maginot Line that could protect their own border, but in terms of getting military men ready for that big of a military force, you would have to fully mobilize your army, essentially getting it ready for war. The French public, the French government at this time, was not interested in doing that because that could lead to a long, drawn-out war. So they're not interested. In terms of England, British Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin at the time was unwilling to contemplate war over the Rhineland. We know that Britain has overstretched its commitments. It has a very large empire, and their armed forces were not in any position to fight a successful war against Germany at this point. And to be honest with you, a lot of members of the British government didn't really see this action as particularly threatening. As you see from the quote that's featured on this slide, which I believe I have, yes, it's there, from Lord Lytton, which is pretty much their foreign chief of staff at this time. The Germans are only going into their own back garden. What's the big deal? They're just going into a territory that they once had complete control over. It was a part of their territory to begin with. It is what it is. We're already almost 20 years removed from the Paris Peace Conference. They're just taking back what's technically rightfully theirs. And on top of that, Hitler, as you know from the previous slideshow, is pretty much, not the previous one, the one before that, is pretty much telling the guys, Britain and France, that, hey, I have to do this for my own security, my own protection, but I'm more than willing to negotiate and redefine and potentially demilitarize this territory if we can agree on certain things. So obviously he is not interested in doing this, but the diplomatic smokescreen, which is said on here, is giving him that literal smokescreen to basically imply, I'm actually a very peaceful guy. I'm just taking over territory to protect Germany's Western Front, and this was territory of ours to begin with years ago. I just want to protect the German people, but I'm willing to negotiate and reach a peace deal. So England is very much okay with Germany marching in there. And again, the whole point for Britain and France, right? Why are we going to get in a war in territory with regard to that was once Germany's, that was demilitarized for the past about 6 years at this point, in terms of no real troops there, no forces? We're not going to get in war of this. It's kind of stupid. It's a little bit silly in terms of this, right? There are the inability of Britain and France to stop Hitler in this situation. For most people, for the public, for conservative members of the British government, for France at this time, it's not that big of a deal. Again, but there are some more anti-appeasers that are a part of the conservative parties within Britain in particular that are very outraged by this. The international agreement said this would be demilitarized. Germany has no right to march in there, and you doing nothing to stop the damn thing is going to lead us to a conflict later on. So Harold Macmillan, a conservative politician in the Star newspaper in Britain, said, "There will be no war now, but unless a settlement is made now, a settlement that can only be made by a vigorous lead from this country, there will be war in 1940 or 1941. Again, this is a minority opinion at this time. Most people would rather appease Hitler, including the British public to a certain extent, than get involved in a war, silly war that leads to the deaths of tens of thousands and potentially millions of men in Europe nearly 20 years after the last one. So we want to avoid this. But what Harold Macmillan is saying here is that you can't just keep appeasing. Because if you keep appeasing, Hitler will keep grabbing and pushing the boundaries, right? It's like with kids with bad behavior. If you keep letting them get away with some things, they are going to continue to push the envelope and see what else they can get away with. All right, Spanish Civil War. When the Spanish Civil War kicks off or is about to kick off, France at this time also has a popular front government. And I told you what that means a while back. That pretty much means that it is a government made up of a coalition of far left to center left parties. Okay, so Prime Minister Leon Blum at this time, he was Prime Minister before, we talked about this, he gets reappointed to that position, is in support of this Spanish Republican government. When I'm saying Republican government, it means that they believe in representative democracy, or having a representative government. The majority parties in that parliament that are running the government are left of center parties, so they form a popular front. Okay, Bloom feared opposition. Well, the big thing is that it was not good to have fascists surrounding you, right? We know this, where France is. They can't will have Germany on their border. If the nationalists take control of Spain, you have it another one on your border. And Italy is also very close to you, separated pretty much by Switzerland and a little bit of a border. So you want to avoid this. That's the big thing. But he feared that he would get opposition if he intervened. Britain, again, France is heavily reliant on Britain at this time. They need to go hand in hand if they're going to do something. He's worried that the British government won't be in favor of this. So what he argues is that if I can't get support from my allies, and I can't get support from the global community, even though I'm very interested in the Republic winning at this time, what I could do is form a non-intervention committee. So I can get all major European powers to agree we're not going to get involved in the Spanish Civil War. And that does come to fruition, and we'll talk about that momentarily, okay? Again, this is the big difference between Britain and France at this time. France is under the control of usually left-of-center governments. Britain is controlled by more conservative governments. So they don't really want to see a popular front win and the Spanish Republican government stay in power. They won't explicitly say that, but they don't want to see that because of the fact that the popular fronts consist of socialists and communists. So their big fear is if the Republic wins and the communists and socialists that are already a part of the government get more support, that could lead to a socialist or communist revolution within Spain, and now it's no longer just the Soviet Union in the farther east of Europe. Now it's Spain, which is only separated up by us from French territory via land, technically, and by a little bit of ocean, right? So they want to avoid that. They don't think it's going to be such a bad thing if the nationalist government wins, because again, you know, it's somebody that's more conservative. We could have Franco on our side. If Franco wins. It's a win for Mussolini. We could potentially keep Mussolini on our side or get Mussolini to try to stay on our side, even though he failed in terms of the Abyssinian crisis. And the big thing is British business interest had interest in Spain, and they feared the financial risk that Franco lost and socialists and communists won. So you see this explicit difference there. All right, so you get the non-intervention committee. So 16 countries signed this non-intervention pact, but the issue is this. Britain signs it, France signs it, Italy signs it, Germany signs it, Soviet Union signs it. But Germany, Italy, and the Soviet Union are going to violate the non-intervention committee agreement, and they're going to send substantial aid to Spain. Britain being a neutral voice in this and not getting involved is actually going to curry favor to the nationalists that are trying to win this Spanish Civil War. It doesn't mean that they're providing them direct aid. It means that, hey, we're neutral observers here. We're not getting involved. And obviously we know that the nationalists having the support of Italy and Germany is going to be much more favorable than the Soviet Union in terms of the ability to get supplies and the fact that two greater than one. And Stalin very much also still focused on those 5-year plans. Okay, so Britain's Britain's non-intervention at this time is going to allow the nationalists to use some naval bases here at Gibraltar. The reason why is because the British have a gut feeling that the nationalists are going to win this war, and they don't want to upset Franco. And even though they're not going to explicitly help Franco and the nationalists, they are going to curry favor to them. So there are some naval bases that the British have near Gibraltar or in Gibraltar. They're going to allow the Spanish nationalists to use this for comms, for communication. Britain's also going to sign a trade agreement with the nationalists as of December of 1936. Okay, allow British companies to trade with rebels, and Franco, not the Spanish Republicans, were able to get credit from British banks. So the British, even though they're not technically involved in this, are currying favor to Franco, looking towards the future. That's their objective here. Okay? Give me 1 second, folks. I'll pick right up in 1 second. All right, so we're back. Big thing, though, is that even though Britain's not involved, like I said, Britain's not involved directly, they're currying favor, looking towards the future. That's their objective here. Okay. Next few things, right? So the policy of non-intervention, super important role in terms of Franco being able to win. Franco is going to get the support of Mussolini, of Hitler. The Republican government is going to get the support of the Soviet Union. That makes the West, particularly Britain, even more concerned with the potential of the Republic winning, not because they're illiberal, but because the threat of Stalin, the threat of socialism or communism is a much greater threat than the threat of fascism at this time. So they want to make sure that they... Sorry, guys, give me one. Keep getting interrupted. Anyway, point being is that the non-intervention pact is violated by Germany, by Italy, by the Soviet Union. For the West, particularly Britain, seeing the Republic win with the support of the Soviet Union is of grave concern, because to them, socialism and communism is a greater threat. By allowing Hitler and Mussolini to violate the non-intervention pact, it just gives Hitler more fuel for fodder. Right? It just allows him, he gets the message that Britain's going to allow him to essentially do whatever he wants, and France is going to go along with it, and nobody's really going to stop him. Okie dokie. Next few things. In terms of the Anschluss, nobody, and I mean nobody, whether it be the League, whether it be France, whether it be Britain, does anything to really stop this. Okay? In terms of, the violation of the Treaty of Versailles, having this happen, invading a sovereign state, these are all things that the West should be standing up against, but they're not able to, okay? France is going through its own internal political crisis at this time. It kind of anticipates on using reservists, but it's not able to because of the fact that, meaning that it's willing to call up guys in reserve, right, that from the military and potentially defend Austria, but Britain has no interest in doing this. For Britain, particularly even for Neville Chamberlain, who's in position of leadership at this point, he is pretty much sending the message that, hey, it is what it is. This was something that was seen. He says the hard fact is nothing could have arrested this action by Germany unless we and others with us had been prepared to prevent it. In his mind, Britain is not interested in preventing this. Like, this was just something, a foregone conclusion. Like, these are ethnic Germans, so what that they're joining Nazi Germany at this point. Italy, not ready to do anything to stop this. You essentially saw that this is basically Mussolini sending the message that, hey, I'm going to allow this to happen. I have a closer relationship with you at this point. Fine, it is what it is. Go at it. Obviously, he wanted further notice when this whole entire thing was going to happen, but end result is can't really do anything to stop it. And the League of Nations is completely weak at this point. Between the terrible response to the Manchurian crisis, between the terrible response to the Abyssinian crisis, they have no leg to stand on in terms of dealing with anything from this point forward. They're not even, there's no reaching out to them with regards to Austria and this Anschluss. So here's two beautiful political cartoons. Hitler putting a ring for the unification of Nazi Germany and Austria with each other. This is regarding the plebiscite that he has in April, right? So a Nazi bachelor becomes engaged by, and that's the author. She said she was 99.75% for me. And this is one of my favorite political cartoons because it's a plebiscite. Do you approve of having your pants kicked? Vote ja or else. And then you can see the Nazis basically forcing the Mussolini, Chamberlain, Daladier, foreign minister for one of the countries. They're marching towards to do the vote. They're basically being forced into the situation. There's nothing that they can do to stop it. One of my favorite parts of this political cartoon is put your jaw here. So meaning, you're going to get kicked in the behind. Right? That's the whole point. All right. So next target, Czechoslovakia. France has agreements with Czechoslovakia to protect it at this time. But the issue is that France is not in the position to really protect it. So as German aggression is going to increase, they are kind of eager to see Britain, at least Neville Chamberlain, be the one to try to reach an agreement to prevent this from going into a full-blown crisis. The people at this time were not eager for a war to protect Czechoslovakia. France at this time is very politically divided, even though they have these agreements to protect Czechoslovakia and protect their mutual interest with each other from treaties they signed in 24 and 25. France is not ready or prepared to get involved militarily to protect Czechoslovakia. And again, this is just the ethnic map that we talked about, right? Britain's reaction, they don't think Czechoslovakia is worth fighting for. And it should be, right? This is, again, and I said it in the last slideshow, this is a bastion of liberal democracy. This is how liberalism can create a multi-ethnic country that can function and function relatively well. But in the eyes of Neville Chamberlain, this was a multi-ethnic country that we created via a treaty. It's artificially made. It's not going to be sustainable. He does feel bad for the Sudeten Germans that are there, that are a part of it, the 3.5 million Germans that are a part of this nation state, and he feels that they have the right to potentially join Germany, and he's willing, and he thinks that he can, because he also is kumbaya, my lord, and this great figure, that he can use diplomatic means to basically negotiate the Sudetenland over to the Germans, okay? And just like France, Britain is not in a position to offer military help to Czechoslovakia. So he writes, Neville Chamberlain, we could not help Czechoslovakia. She would simply be a pretext for going to war with Germany. I have therefore abandoned the idea of giving guarantees to Czechoslovakia, or the French in connection with her obligations to that country. So he has no interest. He's going to negotiate the rights away, essentially, right? So Britain and France are going to seek a diplomatic solution. Why? We know that tensions are rising. We know because of the May crisis, tensions are rising. There's an offer from the president of Czechoslovakia to give the, essentially, Sudeten German party their own freedom and autonomy. Hitler tells them to say no. Hitler signifying, and particularly in this speech in Nuremberg on September 12th, 1938, one of the Nuremberg rallies, pretty much that he's willing to go in there and take it by force. So Neville Chamberlain's going to be the guy that, I'm going to take action. I'm going to go meet with Hitler. I'm going to try to reach an agreement with him. And in that first meeting, he's going to negotiate with Hitler, and Hitler's going to say, hey, any area of Czechoslovakia that has over 50% of Germans should be in German hands, and we can use a international commission to make sure this unfolds properly. And Neville Chamberlain's like, sounds like a great idea. Let me go ask France and Czechoslovakia if they're okay with this. and more so asking France, but more so forcing Czechoslovakia to agree to this. And in his own private diaries, Neville Chamberlain writes after this meeting on September 15th, in spite of the hardness and ruthlessness I thought I saw in his face, I got the impression that here was a man who could be relied upon when he had given his word. What a complete and total joke. Okay. All right. So Chamberlain, over the next few weeks, is able to get his own cabinet to agree to this agreement. He gets France to agree, and he pretty much tells Benz, who's the president of Czechoslovakia, if you do not agree to this, you're on your own in dealing with Hitler and the Nazis. So Czechoslovakia accepts the plan on September 21st, 1938. Of course, we know Hitler doesn't go along with this. It can't be that damn easy for the liberal governments to get an agreement. You know what? I have an exception. It's not enough for us Germans to get the Sudetenland. The Poles, who have Poles living in Czechoslovakia, should get the northern portion over here, and the Hungarians should get some of the southern territory that has Hungarians living there. So Chamberlain has to go back to the drawing board, and he pretty much tells Hitler, that if the demands aren't met, he's going to essentially occupy the Sudetenland really by September 28th, but absolute hard deadline is October 1st if they can't get anything done. Chamberlain goes back to the drawing board. His colleagues reject the proposals that are there, his cabinet members. France says at this point, you know what, if Germany's asking for this much, we should just uphold our agreements with Czechoslovakia. Everybody's preparing for war. Everybody's preparing for war. Even the British public, which you write about in the textbook, it's featured on this slideshow. People started digging trenches in London's parks. 38 million gas masks were distributed. And this is what Neville Chamberlain says. How horrible, fantastic, and incredible it is that we should be digging trenches and trying on gas masks because of a quarrel in a faraway country between people of whom we know nothing. I would not hesitate to pay even a third visit to Germany if I thought it would do any good. Armed conflict between nations is a nightmare to me, but if I were convinced that any nation had made up its mind to dominate the world by fear of its force, I should feel it must be resisted. Under such domination, life for people who believe in liberty would not be worth living. But war is a terrible thing, and we must be very clear before we embark on it that it is really the great issues that are at stake. So he's implying we should technically still try to negotiate. Like, we can't just settle on war is going to happen. There is an ability, again, Neville Chamberlain being this godlike figure to himself, I am going to be able to negotiate. So in the days that follow, Hitler sees this movement. His generals are right, like, we are not ready for a war between Britain and France and us, especially over Czechoslovakia. You need to hopefully get another meeting. And Mussolini's going to be the one that leads this band of four. So it's Neville Chamberlain, Edward Daladier, Adolf Hitler, and Mussolini, Benito Mussolini, that are there, right? There will be a test question that's going to say who's like really responsible for these agreements. It's still Neville Chamberlain at the end of the day. Yes, Mussolini leads this conference, but really it's Neville Chamberlain that's pushing for this appeasement. Okay, so they get their agreement. Czechoslovakia is going to have to give up a great amount of territory, the Sudetenland, territory to the Poles, territory to the Hungarians, and Benz is not invited to this conference that's going to give up so much territory. Neither is Stalin, who has a mutual assistance treaty with Czechoslovakia. So a slap in the face to both of them. But for Neville Chamberlain, this is a huge victory. His diplomacy works. Liberalism works. And on top of that, he gets the agreement with Adolf Hitler, his own personal agreement, which I showed you in that last lecture, where he walks off the plane with the paper that says, "This is the agreement. We are going to handle things through peace. We are going to maintain our agreements on paper. We will have peace in our time," he says. Boy, oh boy, was he wrong. And there are some conservatives that definitely start to voice their frustrations with this, okay? So for the general public and for most of the press, you know, people are okay with this. We avoided war, and we still have the trauma from World War I. But there are conservative politicians that see that something else is going to emerge from this, like Winston Churchill, who calls this a total and unmitigated disaster. Duff Cooper is the first Lord of the Admiralty, is going to resign from the government, and the Labour Party itself opposes it, but most of the conservatives agree with it, most of the press agrees with it, most of the public, because they're still war-weary at this point. You know this. By March 1939... Hitler's going to liquidate the rest of Czechoslovakia, and the British public becomes clearly outraged. And Neville Chamberlain's starting to wake up to the fact that Hitler just loves to be appeased. And all it does is open the door for further and further and further aggression. So he broke inside an agreement. An invasion of Czechoslovakia could not be justified by any aim of uniting Germans, and this starts to shift an opinion in Britain, and Chamberlain was put under pressure to take firmer stances against Hitler. He does start to wake up, right? And I told you this in previous lectures where he realizes, once Hitler starts to threaten Poland and he's saying we deserve the city of Danzig and he takes Memel from Lithuania, Britain's going to back up the Poles and pretty much say we will offer protection should Germany roll in there, okay? And this is very controversial because of the fact that essentially Poland's under its own fascist government at this point. It's very anti-Semitic. It is ideologically much more aligned in general, not saying it's fully racially aligned in terms of racial policies, but overall vibe of the government is very much more far-right fascist, and it doesn't make sense to most of the world. Why are you protecting Poland that's very illiberal, and you couldn't even protect Czechoslovakia that was liberal? And it's very difficult to guarantee this protection and this military support, considering how controversial the government is existing there. But what I want to say is this. Even though Chamberlain gives this support towards Poland, there is still this hope from Neville Chamberlain that he's going to be able to negotiate his way out of this. There is still this slight hope. He, again, is starting to wake up, smell the roses, that Hitler is aggressive, that you won't be able to fully appease him. But there is this hope that, negotiations might still be able to work. As we know, in April of 1939, once this whole entire situation with Memel, with Czechoslovakia, it's all over, Mussolini has got to show off his guns, so he goes into Albania and he takes it over. He invades it on Good Friday, right? This leads Britain and France to offer guarantees to part of Romania and Greece. In May 1939, Britain is also going to negotiate an agreement with Turkey for mutual assistance in case of war in the Mediterranean Sea. So it looks like things are getting more aggressive, right? With the Pact of Steel signed in May of 1939, you're going to see Britain and France really ramp up their military preparations. So even back in March 1939, Britain's government doubled its territorial army, and in April, conscription was introduced. French and British armies were stronger in 1939, and rearmament was bound to reach its peak by 39-40, and Britain would be militarily equal in terms with Germany, which allows them to get a little bit more aggressive with time. As we know, the summer of 1939 is focused on negotiating an agreement with the Soviet Union. And Britain and France are eager to do this because their whole objective now is to protect Poland. And they think if they can get the Soviet Union to say, we will also protect Poland, that might stop Germany's ambitions. But the issue is, France, again, more liberal governments, Britain, more conservative governments. There is a great distrust of the British with the Soviet Union, and they don't necessarily really want to work with them at this point. And there's other reasons outside of the distrust because of strictly, first of all, Stalin's just trust them because of the fact that he wasn't even invited to the Munich conference that involved Czechoslovakia. Britain's very distrustful because of the fact that it's a communist government that's in power. But there's other factors as well. So Soviet army was military weak after Stalin's purges. We talked about those purges way back in October. An alliance could alienate other Eastern European countries that Britain hoped to win over to form a diplomatic front against Germany. That those countries would be much more opposed to the Soviet Union because they're traumatized from them and seeing what they've done to other Eastern European countries. And watching the West get involved with that might push them towards the Nazis. If Germany felt hemmed in, this could actually push them towards war. The big thing for Britain and France is just deterrence at this point. An alliance might push Poland, where Stalin was also distrusted in Spain, into an alliance with Hitler potentially. So that's saying that if Poland is protected by the Soviet Union, it still gives Poland iffy vibes because Poland is, again, more of a... it has a fascist government and it is more so in control at this point. All right, negotiations don't go well. So April 1939, Chamberlain agrees to start negotiations. They don't really go well. Difference of opinion. Britain and France just want protection of Poland, basically want Stalin to agree that, hey, you will protect Poland and we will protect Poland, and that's our only interest. Stalin wanted complete mutual defense agreements with Britain and France. So whereas all three countries would just be focused on the protection of Poland and protecting Poland and going to war with Germany over Poland solely, Stalin was much more eager to say, hey, if the Germans end up invading Russia, Britain and France, you got my back, right? And that was very risky and something that Britain and France weren't eager to get involved with. So, as you know, negotiations don't really go well between Britain, France, and Russia at this point, and Russia is going to run into the arms of Adolf Hitler because Stalin is able to get a better deal from Adolf Hitler and be able to create his own sphere of influence in the eastern part of Europe as a result. And we know it's just the delay tactic, right? But point being, Chamberlain continued to hope for a negotiated settlement all the way up until September 3rd, but last-minute attempts at diplomacy failed. Hitler invades Poland on September 1st, 1939. Remember that Operation Himmler, that false flag that happens the night before. September 3rd at 9 a.m., Chamberlain's going to issue an ultimatum to Germany. Germany doesn't reply. War is declared at 11 a.m. by Britain and France on Germany at that point. So what happens between really throughout the rest of late 1939 into 1940? So despite British and French promises of aid to Poland, they could not help against the rapid onslaught by Germany. During the period of the Phony War, Britain was preparing for an inevitable air attack. They do try to help Finland, but Finland is quickly taken over by the Soviet Union before Allied aid arrives. Allies are going to lay mines near Norway and Sweden to potentially prevent, because it looks like Germany is going to go through Denmark, get into Norway and Sweden, potentially take some of the iron ore that's within Sweden. But the day that they're laying the mines down, Germany's going to launch its full-scale invasion from Denmark into Norway, and the Allied troops are going to be defeated relatively quickly. That is when you're going to see Chamberlain resign, and in comes our boy, Winston Churchill. So Churchill is going to become the new prime minister at that point and lead a coalition government. Okay, France is going to be defeated in June of 1940. British forces are going to leave the mainland Europe and head back through Dunkirk back to Britain. Hitler's going to put forward his peace offensive, so possible. Hitler is going to pretty much tell Britain that the jig is up, that you have no hope, that you should surrender. And there are members of Chamberlain's government that are still working with Winston Churchill's cabinet, that are part of his cabinet, and with the new prime minister Winston Churchill, that are saying Hitler won't ask for crazy terms. Let's just give up. There is no hope. But Chamberlain's going to tell them we need to keep. Churchill's going to tell them we need to keep fighting. Okay, so Churchill's leadership is key because he continues to have hope that Britain can protect itself. He helps maintain morale during the Battle of Britain and the Blitz that's going to follow that in terms of the attacking of British cities at that point. And he's also going to be behind the scenes trying to get more allies, right? Particularly the United States. And I told you this, FDR's hands are tied. And even though FDR does campaign on, especially in 1940, I'm not going to send your boys to war, behind the scenes, FDR is getting more and more eager to get involved in the conflict. Not because he wants war, but because he knows the stakes that are at play here. And I told you his hands were tied from those neutrality acts, right? So the first one that was passed said that 1935 said that it made it illegal for the U.S. to sell weapons to any nation at war. You will see FDR be able to convince Congress to consistently change the means of this. And you will need to know these three. I should really have Lend-Lease on there, but I don't on this test, but these three are on there. So 1936, 7 Act of Cash and Carry. So any non-military supplies sold to nations at war had to be paid for in cash and carried away on their ships, meaning the person's ships that is at war. And then after 1939, after the war started September 1st, after World War II started, policy was amended to allow arms sale to Britain, but still under cash and carry terms. So Britain could buy arms. Then it becomes Lend-Lease, where the Soviet Union and Britain are able to be lent military supplies from the United States in hopes that we'll essentially get back that money later on. Like I told you when we talked about the Japan unit, FDR says you would give your neighbor a hose if their house is on fire because you don't want that house fire to spread to yours. But anyway, besides the point. So Britain's pretty much alone at 1940. Most Americans, even though Britain is alone, don't fully get in support, but FDR and Churchill are working with each other to essentially prepare for future military intervention by the United States. So, by the end of 1940, Britain's also suffering from Germany's U-boat campaign, put Hitler's dumb invasion of Russia, so switching up, focusing on Russia and getting tangled up in there, and Japan's attack and bombing of Pearl Harbor, brings in the United States, which helps the Allied forces, and the Soviets' brutal fighting with the Nazis break down Nazi morale and resources as well. And on top of that, Mussolini's dumb moves down in the Mediterranean. So all these things play a role. Okay, what are the international components to German aggression? Rearmament and the attempted Anschluss, remilitarization, Spanish Civil War and the Anschluss again, and then the Sudetenland forward, all those things. So that is it for our Germany unit. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any comments, questions, or concerns. And I look forward to seeing you all, seeing B Day tomorrow and seeing A Day on Wednesday.